Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ask ServiceMonster show, where you've got questions for your service business and we've got your answers. Today's question comes from inspiration. I had a handful of conversations over the last week that led me to believe you guys need some business basics. So we're going to talk about COGS, cost of goods sold. We're going to talk about gross margins and net margins. So a bit of a background. I'm obsessed with numbers. ServiceMonster is just jam-packed with analytics and data. And my career has been steeped in knowing numbers and then being able to scale and pay attention to that data and those key performance indicators on a regular basis. That being said, be very, very careful here. You can obsess about numbers to the point where that's all you're thinking about and it really doesn't matter to that degree. You can be diving down to the nth degree and focusing on stuff that really doesn't matter. So there's a balance. When I was working for a manufacturing facility, decreasing the amount of time a part took by 600%, well, that had huge impact over a long scale, but can they get more sales of the part, or was it just a nice phenomenon that reduced the overall cost of goods or cost of producing the product? When I was working for another company and I wrote a software package that analyzed the business process and determined that if you buy each person within your collections agency a printer on their own desk, it saved the company about $200,000 a year in terms of lost labor and that kind of stuff. So again, I'm big on data. I'm going to spend a lot of time on data, but I also want you to keep in mind that take this stuff with a grain of salt. You can spend too much time and then actually invalidating your data because you're worrying about the nitty-gritty instead of the bigger picture. So what is it? What is COGS, or cost of goods sold? Basically, it's a metric that says how much does it cost you to provide the service, to clean the house, to do the rug, to scrub the windows. How much is it costing you to perform that service? And then how much are you getting? Those two numbers are played against each other to make basically a margin, a gross margin. So we'll break that down a little bit and how you calculate that. Before we do that though, why do you need to know this? Why is it important to understand your cost of goods sold? Basically, I get into a lot of conversations that go, hey Joe, I want to scale. How do I make my business bigger? If you have a problem, you're about to scale your problems. No amount of scaling is going to help you out of an unprofitable product. If I'm selling my product for $10 and it costs me $12 to produce, I'm losing $2 every time. If I start selling those things in mass, I'm going to lose massive amounts of money. And you guys don't really understand or have clued me into the fact that many of you don't understand the breakdown of your job and what you're actually spending. This becomes pretty apparent with some of the lowball cleaners, right? $50 a room. They're not making any money off those deals, and if they continue to push their business that way, they're just going to burn out and go out of business. We see it happen all the time. But it can come in a more insidious form too, that you think you're actually making money, but when you put pen to paper, you realize your margins are so thin or your profit is so low that any kind of scale is just going to be a headache. So how do you calculate it? So the first thing I would go for is simplicity. You don't want to spend 20 hours on this, right? You want to be able to do this quarterly or monthly and understand for that time period what was your gross margin and is it in tune with the rest of the year? Are the ebbs and flows seasonal, or are they anomalies with your business, something that needs to be addressed? So let's just keep things simple and break down how you calculate your cost of goods sold. So we're going to go off averages here. I mean, you can calculate every single job, but it's kind of pointless. There'll be some jobs where you'll actually make no money off of it. And that's okay sometimes. We've talked to Doug Bursman. He brought up some compelling humanitarian stories that would lend that to be true. Again, averages are probably what's going to do you credit here. And what you're looking for is a breakdown of a couple things. First of all, labor. How much does it cost to put guys in the house and then do the cleaning? How much are you paying them on a gross scale for that particular job? Then, of course, you have materials. You've got the cost of your juice, the chemicals that you're using. You've got the cost of gas. How much did it take you to get there? So any of the consumables that you're using that just go away as part of the application of your service. One thing you guys typically don't think about is depreciation. Your chemicals are one thing, right? That's pretty easy. You use $10 in chemical on site, that's a $10 cost. But what about your truck mount or your pressure washing unit? What about your RX-20, right? Or the wand? So if you have fairly expensive gear, you're wearing and tearing on them every single time. The Uber and Lyft people get into this, right? Because they're not taking into account how much it actually costs them to drive around in terms of gas, insurance, but certainly depreciation on the vehicle. It's no different from you guys. And so if you buy a $15,000 truck mount, every time you use it, it's taking a hit, it's taking a ding. And so that needs to roll up in your cost of goods sold as well. All right, and the margin. So how do you figure out that general margin? The calculations is pretty simple. You take your gross sales and then you subtract out how much that cost, and that's your gross profit. It's really not any more complicated than that. We're obviously skipping a whole bunch of extra costs, marketing and sales, administration, insurance, and that kind of stuff, right? But cost of goods sold, or your gross margin, is not taking into that account. It's what will happen if you scale your service over and over and over again. You really want to separate that out. Now, if you're providing multiple services, things can get a little interesting, because you could have a cost of goods sold for your carpet cleaning, but what about your pressure washing or your tile and grout cleaning? Those are going to have a different cost of goods sold. And so I would encourage you to look at each service that you're providing overall. So Mrs. Jones may want 2 or 3 of these services on a single ticket. So how do you determine what's what? Again, averages, right? Just average this stuff out so you know where you guys are at. So let's do an example real quick. Let's say you go out and do a job. You're sending 2 people and it takes 2 hours, and your ticket is going to be $240. So those 2 employees, paying them $15 an hour, you're looking at $60 in labor costs. Now, we're going to also throw in the cost of chemicals and material. We're going to say that that costs $20. And then if you calculate your depreciation, you can do it like this. Let's say you spent $18,000 on a rig, and that includes the extensions and hoses and, all the bells and whistles. Depreciate that over 3 years. And so what you're looking at essentially is $500 a month of depreciation. So you buy it on day 1, and 3 years later, essentially you're looking to replace it, just from the point of calculation. So at $500 an hour, let's say you do 50 jobs a month, you're looking at $10 of depreciation a job. So we're going to throw that in there too. And so you've got your 60 plus of labor, your 20 of chemicals, and your $10 in depreciation. And so what you're looking at then is $90 for the cost of the job. That's the cost that it takes you to perform the work in order to get the job done. And if you're pulling in $240, then obviously a little bit of math there, and you're looking at $150 in gross profit. So take that number, $150, and the total amount, the $240, you're going to divide those up and come up with a percentage. And in this case, it's a 62% margin, and that's not bad. You typically want to be in between 60 and 80% for your service businesses. So this needs a little tweaking. They should be charging a touch more for their services. All right, now what about indirect costs, right? And this is where net margins come in. So you have other things like sales, administration costs. You've got office staff that, they're answering the phones, but they're not actually generating you any revenue, right? It's only the people who are going out into the home and providing that service that are actually generating the cash for the business. Typically, a gross margin is going to leave all of that out. Now, you can look at net margins, and that's essentially the profitability of your business. You take within your time period how much total revenue you've collected, and you subtract that out from your total expenses in order to perform that function. And that includes everything. And that's your net margin. I'm not a fan of both of those for the service industry, and I'll tell you why. It leaves out one really important number that you guys throw under the bus all the time: your marketing expenses. So let's talk about a modified margin that I call job net margin. And it's the same thing as a gross margin, but what I like to do is throw in your marketing costs. So let's talk about that for a second. Most service businesses right now are calculating pulling leads in at about $20 to $30 per lead. But in order to then service that lead and actually land the sale and collect money, it takes anywhere from $60 to $80 to get in the home to go do the job. And so throwing that into the mix, and now we're looking at a very much different calculation. So you've got your $60 in labor, you've got your $20 in materials, you've got your $10 in depreciation, and we're gonna throw another $80 in to get in the door for a new client. And so that runs you $170 to land and service that job. So that gives you a job net margin of about 30%. Not so great. And as you start to scale that, that's just going to become more problematic. It's going to be harder to do those admins. It's going to be devastating when people ask for raises or when they're due raises and you need to bring in new people. So that business needs to be fixed. And not a lot of you guys are even there. So go through those calculations, do it the standard because you want to know apples to apples. When somebody asks you what your COGS is, you want to be able to give that number off. But then look at that job net margin that I'm talking about, because you want to throw your marketing expenses into this as well, because you want to be doing those on a regular basis. Now, if you are a little savvy, you saw a flaw in my plan there, that only accounts for acquiring new clients. When you're servicing existing clients, that $80 goes away. And so the margins on existing clients, much, much higher. You may only spend 10 or $5 or $10 keeping those clients in client retention strategy, and yet you're spending $80 to get in the door of a new prospect. And so that's why repeat rate is so much more profitable. It means so much to the company, and I preach about it all the time. All right, guys, so wrapping up. You've got COGS. I want you to learn more about it. I want you to do the calculation. I want you to average things out and don't get caught up in the details. Let's just do some whiteboard general calculations so you know where you're at. And don't obsess. Do it quarterly. And if you're ambitious, go ahead and do it monthly. Until next time, guys, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go check out the demo. Give us a call.